Eastern Peru descends from the Andes into a broad expanse of lowland rainforest. Rivers branch and rejoin across floodplains, forming tributaries that eventually feed the Amazon. From above, the canopy appears continuous, an unbroken surface of green extending to the horizon. Beneath that canopy, visibility narrows to a few meters. Vines connect trunks. Fallen branches decay rapidly in humidity. Insects move constantly through leaf litter and air. The ground is uneven, interrupted by roots, mud, and concealed water channels. Rainfall is frequent and often sudden. Thunderstorms build quickly over the forest, releasing intense bursts of lightning and wind before passing. During the wet season, streams swell and change course. During drier months, they narrow but remain persistent. Sound travels differently in the forest. Rain striking leaves masks distant movement. Animal calls echo without clear direction. The environment does not provide open sightlines. Orientation depends on close observation rather than horizon. Temperatures remain warm year-round. Humidity is high. Clothing and exposed skin remain damp. Wounds do not dry easily. Organic material decomposes rapidly in heat. Air travel over this region crosses large stretches without intermediate landing points. From altitude, the forest offers few visible clearings. Rivers appear as thin lines cutting through the canopy. Settlements are sparse and often accessible only by boat. The rainforest does not present itself as hostile in any immediate way. It is active and layered. Movement through it requires constant adjustment, but the environment remains stable in its density. In December, storms are common over eastern Peru. Lightning activity increases in the afternoon and evening. Aircraft crossing the region must navigate through convective weather systems that form unpredictably. From above, the forest is uniform. From within, it is directional, only if one understands how water moves through it. On December 24, 1971, LANSA Flight 508 departed from Lima, Peru, bound for Pucallpa in the Amazon basin. The aircraft was a Lockheed L-188 Electra, operated by Linhas Aéreas Nacionales S.A. The route crossed the Andes before descending into the rainforest lowlands. Among the passengers were 17-year-old Juliane Koepcke and her mother, Maria Koepcke. Both were returning to Pucallpa, where Juliane's parents directed a biological research station in the Amazon. Her father, Hans Wilhelm Koepcke, had remained behind at the station. Juliane had grown up between Lima and the rainforest. She had accompanied her parents on fieldwork and learned practical knowledge about jungle ecology, wildlife behavior, and navigation along streams. Her familiarity with the environment was observational rather than survival-focused, but it provided context uncommon among urban travelers. The flight was delayed earlier in the day due to heavy holiday demand. Weather reports indicated storms over the Andes and into the eastern lowlands. Despite this, the aircraft proceeded. Inside the cabin, conditions were ordinary. The flight was short, expected to last just over an hour. Passengers were seated in standard rows. Juliane sat next to her mother. There was no anticipation of abnormal events. As the aircraft crossed into storm systems over the mountains, turbulence increased. Lightning activity was visible through windows. The plane continued into dense cloud cover. The Electra was designed for regional service and capable of handling moderate turbulence. However, the storm cells over the Andes that afternoon were severe. Convective currents produced strong updrafts and downdrafts. Lightning strikes were not uncommon in such conditions. At approximately 3,000 meters above ground, lightning struck the aircraft. The strike ignited fuel in a wing tank. The right wing detached. Structural failure followed rapidly. The fuselage broke apart mid-air. Passengers were thrown from the aircraft. Sections of the cabin separated. Debris scattered over a wide area of rainforest. There was no controlled descent, no emergency landing. The aircraft disintegrated in seconds. The storm continued over the canopy below. When the aircraft disintegrated, Juliane Koepcke remained strapped to a section of 3 seats. She later reported losing consciousness during the fall. The altitude from which she descended was estimated at approximately 10,000 feet after the breakup. The section of seats rotated as it fell, slowing descent slightly as it encountered dense air and eventually the forest canopy. The rainforest below was layered. The upper canopy absorbed much of the impact energy before the seat structure reached lower branches and undergrowth. This combination likely reduced the force of final contact with the ground. Juliane regained consciousness on the forest floor. It was December 25th, 1971. The storm had passed. Rain continued intermittently. She was alone. Her injuries were significant, but not immediately incapacitating. She had a broken collarbone, deep lacerations, a swollen eye, and a torn ligament in her knee. She was still wearing her summer dress and one sandal. The other shoe had been lost in the fall. Debris from the aircraft was scattered beyond visible range. There was no sign of other survivors in her immediate vicinity. The forest absorbed sound. There were no voices or signals. Juliane remained on the ground for an uncertain period before attempting to stand. She called for her mother, but received no response. She located a small bag of candy among debris and kept it as a food source. Her understanding of the forest, shaped by years at her parents' research station, influenced her first decision. She knew that water flowed toward larger streams and eventually toward settlements. Walking randomly through the forest without orientation would increase risk. Following water offered direction. Within hours of regaining awareness, she located a small stream. It was narrow but flowing steadily. She began to move downstream. There was no immediate sense of time. The forest provided no clear horizon. Movement required stepping over roots, pushing through undergrowth, and navigating uneven terrain. Her knee injury limited speed. The crash site was behind her. The aircraft had fallen in multiple sections across kilometers of forest. Rescue efforts were underway elsewhere, but visibility from the air was limited by canopy density. From this point forward, Juliane Koepcke was not waiting to be found. She was walking. The small stream Juliane Koepcke found on her first day became the central axis of her survival. It was narrow enough to step across in places, but it moved steadily in one direction. Her father had once explained that in the Amazon, following water downstream increased the likelihood of reaching human activity. Settlements and logging camps were often located along larger rivers. She moved slowly. Her broken collarbone limited the use of her right arm. Her knee injury made climbing over fallen logs difficult. She waded through the stream when banks were too dense to traverse. The water reduced the need to push through thick undergrowth and provided orientation without reliance on sightlines. Food was minimal. She rationed the small bag of candy recovered from the crash site, consuming one piece at a time. The rainforest offered fruits and insects, but she avoided eating unfamiliar plants. Her parents had warned her that experimentation could be more dangerous than hunger. Water was constant, but not treated. She drank directly from the stream. The flow reduced stagnation risk compared to standing pools. Her knowledge did not eliminate danger, but it shaped decisions toward lower-risk options. Nights were unstructured. She did not build elaborate shelters. Instead, she rested on relatively dry ground near the stream, sometimes beneath overhanging vegetation. Insects were persistent. Mosquitoes and flies gathered around exposed wounds. Sleep was fragmented. The forest canopy reduced temperature variation, but clothing remained wet. Her single sandal wore down against rocks. Eventually, she continued barefoot. Each day followed the same pattern: wake, assess injury, move downstream. There was no attempt to retrace steps to the crash site. She understood that aircraft debris could be scattered widely, and that wading in dense canopy reduced visibility from above. Occasionally, she encountered sections where the stream widened or merged with another. These junctures confirmed forward movement toward larger waterways. The current strengthened gradually over days. Her injured eye limited depth perception. Roots and submerged rocks caused falls. She rose each time and continued. There was no recorded instance of panic-driven running or abrupt deviation from the water's course. Search teams flew over the region in the days following the crash. They were unable to see through the canopy. Juliane reported hearing aircraft faintly on at least one occasion, but did not leave the stream to attempt signaling. The forest overhead obscured visibility. Rainfall continued intermittently. Thunderstorms returned briefly and passed. The environment did not shift dramatically from day to day. The primary change was internal. Fatigue accumulated. Hunger persisted, but did not escalate sharply due to limited exertion and consistent hydration. By the seventh day, the stream had grown noticeably wider. Movement through water became easier than navigating banks. She allowed the current to guide direction without attempting shortcuts. Injury management was limited to observation. Wounds remained open. One deep cut on her shoulder began to show signs of infection. She lacked tools or antiseptic. Her approach remained consistent, move toward larger water. The forest offered no visible boundary between wilderness and habitation. Only gradual widening of the stream suggested transition. After approximately 10 days, she encountered a small boat tied along the bank near a crude shelter. It was evidence of human presence, though no one was visible at that moment. She remained near the site rather than moving on. By the time Juliane Koepcke reached the small boat along the riverbank, she had been walking for approximately 10 days. Her physical condition had deteriorated steadily. Weight loss was visible. Her broken collarbone remained untreated. The deep wound on her shoulder had become infected. Maggots were visible within the cut. She had encountered maggots before in the rainforest during her parents' fieldwork. She understood that while their presence was disturbing, they could consume necrotic tissue. The risk lay in secondary infection rather than the insects themselves. Still, the wound required attention. Near the boat, she found a small container of gasoline used by local loggers. Drawing on prior knowledge, she poured a small amount into the infected wound. The liquid flushed out maggots. The procedure was painful, but effective in clearing visible larvae. Exhaustion altered perception. Time had blurred. Days were counted approximately by sunrise and sleep cycles, rather than calendar certainty. She later estimated that she had walked 11 days from the crash site, though precise measurement is difficult. Hunger persisted, but had become secondary to weakness. The bag of candy had been consumed days earlier. She did not attempt to fish or trap. Her energy was conserved for movement rather than food acquisition. The presence of the boat indicated proximity to human activity. However, no one was present when she arrived. She remained near the shelter, uncertain whether to continue downstream or wait. The forest around the camp showed signs of use: cut branches, stacked wood, a cleared patch of ground. These markers differed from natural growth patterns she had seen for days. They suggested regular return. During the 11th day, local lumbermen returned to the site. They found Juliane near the shelter. Communication was limited by language and her weakened state, but they recognized her condition as urgent. They provided food cautiously and basic first aid. The following day, they transported her by boat to a nearby settlement. From there, she was flown to a hospital in Pucallpa. Medical evaluation confirmed her injuries, but noted the absence of life-threatening internal trauma. She had survived the fall, the jungle, and infection through sustained movement rather than immobility. The crash of LANSA Flight 508 resulted in 91 fatalities. Juliane Koepcke was the sole survivor. The forest had not guided her. It had allowed passage along water until she intersected human activity. When the lumbermen returned to their riverside shelter, they did not expect to find anyone waiting. The small camp consisted of a rough structure with a thatched roof, tools stacked against a wall, and a boat secured to a tree along the bank. It was a temporary working site used intermittently during logging operations. Juliane Koepcke was seated nearby when they arrived. She was barefoot, wearing a torn dress, and visibly weakened. Her eye was swollen. Her right shoulder showed signs of infection. She spoke Spanish and explained that she had fallen from an airplane days earlier. The men gave her food in small portions to avoid overwhelming her system. They cleaned her wounds more thoroughly than she had been able to manage alone. The gasoline she had used had removed maggots, but left the skin irritated. They covered the wound and allowed her to rest. Transport out of the forest was not immediate. The following day, they loaded her into their boat and traveled downstream to a larger settlement. From there, arrangements were made for a flight to Pucallpa. At the hospital, physicians documented a broken collarbone, deep lacerations, and signs of infection, but no severe internal injuries. She had sustained a concussion during the fall, but had regained consciousness without prolonged neurological impairment. Dehydration was present, but not advanced. Her survival was attributed to a combination of physical resilience, the moderating effect of the canopy during her fall, and the decision to follow water rather than move randomly through forest. Search operations for LANSA Flight 508 had ceased days earlier due to lack of visible wreckage from the air. Juliane later assisted authorities in locating the crash site by flying over the region and identifying sections of debris through gaps in the canopy. Her mother, Juliane Koepcke, was among those who perished in the crash. No other passengers survived. The 11 days between impact and rescue were not marked by extraordinary improvisation. They were defined by steady movement along a natural pathway that increased the probability of encountering human activity. Rescue did not conclude the event with celebration. It confirmed survival and loss simultaneously. Juliane Koepcke's survival did not depend on conquering the rainforest. It depended on aligning with one of its simplest patterns: water flows toward people. Her decision to follow a stream downstream reduced the number of variables she had to manage. It replaced random search with directional movement. Her upbringing in a biological research station did not provide survival training in a formal sense. It provided familiarity. She understood that eating unfamiliar plants carried risk. She knew that rivers in the Amazon basin connect settlements. She recognized the signs of human use when she reached the logging camp. The rainforest did not become less dense during those 11 days. It did not offer shelter deliberately or provide visible pathways. It remained layered, humid, and indifferent. Survival emerged from reducing choices to one consistent rule and following it without deviation. Youth contributed to endurance. Her physical resilience allowed her to withstand dehydration and infection that might have immobilized others. But resilience alone did not determine direction. The forest offered multiple possibilities: wandering, climbing, waiting. She selected the one that increased probability incrementally. The crash of LANSA Flight 508 remains one of the most unusual aviation survival events recorded in the Amazon. The canopy absorbed a fall that would otherwise have been fatal. The stream network provided a navigational framework without requiring a map. The forest did not rescue her. It allowed her to move within it long enough to intersect human presence. The outcome was not dramatic. It was sequential, step by step, water to river, river to camp. 11 days in dense jungle left no visible trace on the landscape. The canopy closed over debris. The river continued to flow. What remained was a record of sustained movement through an environment that did not alter for her survival, but did not prevent it either.